Empire's USA playthrough. It feels both good and bad to be saying that, as we bring our American adventure to a close. At the start of the stream we found ourselves in multiple conflicts not of our choosing. The situation to the north with the British had been drawn to a head, and we found ourselves surrounding them on two sides here with two much larger armies as their battered and bruised forces tried to scramble together in a sort of defiant last stand. The noose was slowly tightening as we had a full army here, albeit replenishing, moving towards Huron territory and then up towards York Factory, the most northern province that they held. We had a full stack here which was moving on from Yankton. Over in the east we'd kept quite a large garrison in Quebec, just in case, likely to be the first landing point. Also, we didn't know if they were going to sally anything west from their two provinces here in Newfoundland and in Montagnais. With no idea what the situation was there. They had only the Bahamas left, which we were looking to do something about very shortly. And as we popped over towards the European theatre, London was in our hands, albeit the population was, let's say, not too happy, to say the least. The Royal Navy pretty much had us under siege, and one of our largest European armies was actually trapped here. You can see they're heading up to Edinburgh to try and help out with some British forces that were still running sort of a riot around here. We're trying to recruit some forces where we could and maybe produce a small navy that we could use to try and hop over. How that would play out, we had no idea. We were trying to push towards Morocco here, but every time we did there was some sort of civil disturbance, so we're trying to sort of map that out, and at the same time we're trying to scramble together some navies here so that we can challenge both the Royal Navy and the Austrian Navy, which we do currently have hemmed into the Adriatic, which is looking good for us. The AEF found themselves outstretched and outnumbered pretty much since their creation has been their constant state of existence. Multiple Austrian armies in the vicinity are causing us problems, so hopefully that's something we'll look to deal with. And apart from that, we're just looking to consolidate and hopefully bring an end to the tyrannical British Empire. As we got ourselves underway, the decision was made by our most senior general, Pierce Ramsay, to sally out against the Austrians with his battered and exhausted AEF remnants, accompanied by some local garrisons who had not actually seen any combat as yet. To say we were unsure of our chances was an understatement. Alas, we took to the field, giving our local militias and garrisons an opportunity to impress on the left flank, as the professional body of our army took defensive positions and dug in for the assaults to come. In a surprising turn of events, our militia and conscripts found themselves fighting the enemy's conscripts, whom hailed from each corner of the vast Austrian Empire, which now stretched from Morocco to Poland. It's interesting because they're sort of, let's just call them lesser units, are in a skirmish with our lesser units, and I really don't know who'll come out on top. We managed to manoeuvre some of our battered light cavalry in the form of the Congressional Tutors to assist our militia, and it was not long before the enemy's left flank began to collapse. At this point, our militia perhaps entered a false sense of security, thinking, this isn't that difficult. As our soldiers cheered, the main body of the enemy army leaped into action and started advancing towards our main line. The success of our flank skirmish immediately disappeared, and we realised the main task still lay ahead. We then realised the enemy cavalry had spotted our under-supported militia, and they took charge. These were no regular regiments of cavalry, these were the elite horse guards, cavalry of the Austrian royals. Our Congressional Tutors, who have been with the AEF since the force's inception, saw this as an opportunity and threw themselves at the elite enemy cavalry, buying our surrounding infantry time to reload and form a defensive line. The entire time our army was occupied on the left, our centre and right found themselves eager to join the engagement. Our artillery batteries had opened fire, and the all too familiar sound of puckle guns began ringing overhead. At this point, General Ramsay passed some sort of remark to his troops as he rode past, ushering them to take the field and support their local comrades. With barely the blink of an eye, the entire professional contingent began advancing through the field. As they advanced through the battlefield, they could hear musket shot ringing out just on the far side of the small peaks and troughs in front of them. Then, upon cresting the last one, they realised our militia and local Minutemen still held firm, firing now at the enemy's line infantry. There was little left to be done other than a slight clean-up operation. Our Minutemen and garrison troops had held firm under the fire of overwhelming enemies, earning masses of respect from ally and foe alike. Our veteran General Pierce Ramsay remarked, "All Rome will be amazed at such a victory. The day is ours," a remark that seems somewhat familiar in hindsight. In the aftermath of the Sixth Battle in the vicinity of Naples, we realised that reinforcements were paramount to our continued involvement in the theatre, so a massive logistical operation was carried out to reinforce from all over the Mediterranean. With operations ramping up against the British and preparations falling into place, a large-scale engagement against them was unavoidable. The ongoing conquest in and around the British Isles had grown to a stalemate, with the Royal Navy controlling the seas and the United States Army controlling almost all of mainland Britain. The one holdout, ironically, being Dublin in Ireland, the last bastion of British tyranny. With all of this in mind, the US naval force in the Mediterranean was drawn together into one task group in order to clear a path out of the Mediterranean so our naval power could be thrown towards the British mainland in a hope to break the deadlock. Another legendary naval battle was about to happen off the coast of Algiers. Some cinematic shots for the YouTube. That is pretty impressive looking, isn't it? I just want to sit and just admire it, really. Our navy, the strongest combination of ships we could gather, included 8 heavy first-rate ships of the line, 1 second-rate, 2 fourth-rates, 2 24-pound frigates, 2 carronade frigates, which were supported by 4 artillery ships of our experimental bomb catch and rocket builds, were fresh and eager but faced a fair task. The Royal Navy was placed in and around 2 ports on each side of the Mediterranean, acting as a quick response force, meaning we would really fight 2 battles here in quick succession. After getting into a rough formation and Gorham's cactus taking point, the fearless captain sailed straight down the enemy's throat, complete confidence in the men under his command and the experimental artillery that supported him alike. As the cactus sailed forward, the captain, Gorham, was seen banging large drums he was said to have crafted himself as the rockets rained overhead. Just the sort of man you want at the helm of your navy in one of the most pivotal battles they have faced. The first rocket volley did not disappoint. The enemy admiral's lead ship in the line was immediately set ablaze and lost one of their masts, with the others being damaged. The ship immediately removed its colours and surrendered to us. One of the most devastating openings to a naval battle in history. As Gorham's cactus closed the gap, followed by the Peen.es, the enemy's lead ship, despite already surrendering, further surrendered to the fire. Despite the best attempts of her crew, her powder magazine must have been ignited, and she went up in a fiery hot spiral of death. Such a powerful explosion that the enemy's second ship in the line immediately caught fire and found herself surrendering as well. Our lead ships, seeing this detonation, were fearful of what naval warfare had become, and just as they were getting over the devastation caused previously, the second ship in the enemy's formation suffered the exact same fate, and in an exact replica of what happened before, the third ship of the line, which was within spitting distance, also caught fire and began surrendering. Would the situation repeat again? God, look at it. God, it's beautiful. Oh God, look at the damage. They cannot contend with these. The Royal Oak. What a great name for a ship. They're dead. Our heavy ships that had been expected to do the brunt of the work were, at this point, ordered to move and intercept the second British fleet that was trying to sail towards the engagement. The experimental ships, coupled with our frigates, being deemed powerful and mobile enough to achieve victory of what little remained of the British fleet to the north. Gorham's cactus, having taken the brunt of the enemy's attention and on fire itself, was ordered to disengage and attempt to keep itself afloat. Then, as the final British ship of the Northern Fleet went under the waves, with the rest having surrendered or exploded, we found ourselves reflecting on the situation, this possibly being quite symbolic as the end of the Royal Navy's monopoly on the sea. With the chaos in the north at the end, we found ourselves scrambling, trying to reorganise and head south to engage the second fleet. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts to manoeuvre our ships into a favourable position, nighttime would beckon before the engagement against the second fleet could come to fruition, and retreating back towards our stronghold in the central Med was seen as the safest approach, allowing us to safely capitalise on our victory. Algiers appeared to have become a theatre on its own, both at sea and on land, as the Austrians sallied out of Morocco in an attempt to stop our North African corps from freeing Morocco from the oppressive Austrian Empire. The Austrians had proven so far to be one of the more difficult armies we had faced, with much larger infantry regiments than standard and elite ranged units in the form of Jaegers. Every battle was heavy on both the loser and the victor alike. Our NEC found themselves deploying desperately around a small hill on the outskirts of a small coastal town, hoping to use this as the cornerstone of our defensive efforts. During our deployment, it was realised that there was not a single regiment that had not suffered moderate to heavy losses in a previous engagement with rebels en route through Algiers. Nonetheless, American pride was at stake. It was elected that we would deploy in a long line with cavalry cover in place on each flank and skirmishers acting as a screening force placed just behind their own cavalry traps. The general plan of action was to buy time and allow our rockets opportunities to hit the enemy with as many barrages as possible. God, that's so badass, man. Tell me they're going here. Look at the blob. Tell me that's what they're going for, right? Here, it's not terrible. Oh my god, look at it. Like the 4th of July. These strikes were incredibly successful, as one of the rockets managed to knock the opposing general from his saddle, killing him instantly. Without their experienced commander, how would the Austrians fare? As soon as this thought had even entered our minds, the picket line of rangers began firing at an enemy unit, and a skirmish had broken out. These rangers were ordered to fire 6 volleys, then retreat behind the main body of the army, where they would then be sent to the flanks to offer support. There was for a few minutes a fear that almost took hold of our regiments, but alas the support of skirmishers and Pulaski's cavalry was enough to calm the nerves. As the left engaged, our centre was called upon as the enemy infantry closed into spitting distance. Our cannons were quickly scrambled to enable canister shot, and devastating close-range proximity rendered the closely packed enemy line infantry useless as we tore holes in the overly packed lines. As both sides' centres found themselves locked in, Pulaski's legions, supported by a regiment of horse, sprung into action. With a devastating charge, they went sweeping through the enemy's flank where they had concentrated a number of grenadier regiments, leading to cause quite a large hole in the enemy's line. We also managed to catch one of the Austrians' elite Jaeger units whilst they were off guard and exposed, removing them from the battlefield. With both of the Austrians' flanks collapsing and cavalry harassing the enemy's rear, the lines of Austrians began breaking and routing in a disorderly fashion. With our limited cavalry numbers, we ran down as many as possible, but it appeared the Austrian army would live to fight another day down in Morocco. In the aftermath of action in Morocco, it was reported to us that a local Scottish contingent had seen action against some British forces in and around Edinburgh. The Scots had proven themselves loyal, and we allowed them to keep their own standing army supplied and equipped by ourselves. It was reported that they routed the last remnants of the British army from mainland Britain, forcing them into their last bastion on the British mainland, Dublin. With all eyes in Europe fixed upon the British Isles and the stalemate there, no one was expecting an Austrian counterattack on the already depleted and exhausted North African Corps. We were used to fighting battles where we were at a disadvantage, however this one was one of the most dire situations we had found ourselves in. Our African army found itself exposed and surrounded by enemy forces in the heart of Austrian Morocco. The sentence I just spoke giving many modern historians a stroke at the complexity of the course of events that would lead to such a situation. Ah yes, the battle. A local courthouse was spotted, and it was decided we would defend with this being our centre point. As our skirmishers deployed anti-cavalry traps, our rockets rained overhead. The Austrians had developed a nickname for these weapons, Diaz from Fiery Stisk. Who knew what that translated to? With the lay of the land, the enemy were unable to approach us from anywhere other than the wide open plains, serving our range and artillery advantage well. The enemy cavalry, accompanied by dragoons, were first to probe our lines, getting themselves caught and repelled while most of our infantry was still getting into position. With the early success, confidence once again rose. The Austrians, who seemed to be ignorant to our defensive doctrine, decided to once again ride straight at our lines. Perhaps they hoped to destroy all of our cavalry traps with their own dead. Fire, in trouble, lads. Okay, lads are doing their work. They're a bit now. Then, as you just witnessed, our army, while battered and bruised, still operated like the finely tuned machine it was. Skirmishers covering the flanks, line infantry pinning the enemy down, while the grand American batteries rained death from above. It was our cavalry's turn at this point. They were sent to the flanks to run down any enemy stragglers. At this point, the enemy morale started to waver. Our line was holding solid under immense enemy pressure, our line infantry doing their job, while our sharpshooters sniped the enemy officers on their approach, disrupting the enemy's efficiency. It wasn't long before we had them surrounded and ran them down, this time allowing as few as possible to escape, attempting to learn through our mistakes of the previous battle on the coast. With the Austrians routing from the field, we finally had the path to Morocco wide open. However, there had been an awkward stalemate developing in Italy, and despite recent success in Morocco, we found ourselves unwilling to surrender any more American lives for a war with no real end in sight or true goal. So, it was decided that we would attempt to engage in peace talks with the Austrians, which was greeted on the Senate floor with mixed emotions. As Senate debated the best outcome of these talks, Operation Dublin Swarm was put into action. This involved a small merchant navy flotilla transporting our large force from the British Isles to the southern Irish coastline in an attempt to invade discreetly. These ships had to be fast and have a hold that could conceal our troops, artillery and cavalry. The operation was risky as the Royal Navy held full unrivalled dominance in and around the Atlantic, focused around the British Isles. Nonetheless, it was undertaken, and after much squeaky bum time and hell breath, the force landed. Now the march had to be made through unknown territory, with the Royal Navy cutting off any form of retreat. The force would live on immortally, as victors, liberators even, or they would be destroyed and never spoken of again. We're in, boys! We're in! With preparations underway in Southern Ireland for the march to Dublin, we found ourselves greeted with support from the locals, much in the same spirit and mood as in Scotland. As a majority of our intelligence services were deployed in Europe, and especially the British Isles, a counterattack from the British was not considered or anticipated in Canada. They had rallied the last remnants of their professional units and militias alike just off the most southern point of the Hudson Bay, right next to the trapping town nicknamed Moose Factory. The final battle for Canada was about to be fought. We for once did outnumber the enemy handsomely, but this was a last stand, and a desperate enemy is an unpredictable one, so nothing would be taken for granted. We deployed in a standard formation and had our veteran dragoons occupying our flanks. As the engagement began, the enemy reinforcements were spotted approaching from our west flank, and the dragoons were deployed to counter this. With one thunderous volley from close range, the dragoons charged in, pinning the infantry in place until the other regiments arrived, sending the enemy's reinforcements from the battlefield in a disastrous rout. This left our main line with only one worry: what was straight in front of them. As the now comforting and familiar noise of puckle guns began ringing out, it meant the enemy were almost in range. Our lines stood firm and ready to face the last remnants of British tyranny. However, the large engagement we hoped for would never come to fruition. The battered and decimated British forces never really managed to engage our front line properly. Our technologically advanced artillery pieces were unmatched, and this, accompanied by our dragoons' hit and run tactics, allowed us to take the field without a lengthy line infantry battle. That era had seen its day, where two lines of men lining up at a gentlemanly 100 yards would literally knock lumps out of each other while standing shoulder to shoulder. Our new doctrines and weaponry giving us an advantage that the British could not currently match. While we had extinguished the flame of tyranny in the frozen tundra in the northern reaches of Canada, another tyrant still remained at large. The Austrian Empire, despite currently being in peace talks with ourselves, decided they would attempt to break the deadlock once again around Naples. We were massively outnumbered and knew an uphill battle awaited us. This was nothing new. In a surprising turn of events, the enemy army appeared to field some captured puckle guns. We decided that we would not fix ourselves into position at the outset until we knew where the enemy were approaching us from. This meant that some quick organisation was required. Our dragoon regiments knew they would be kept busy, as the Austrian heavy cavalry was renowned, and we knew there had been lifeguards deployed in the vicinity. The thin blue, white and red line would have to hold, or Naples would be under threat once again. Among these regiments, we had the Harlem Hellfighters, a regiment fully comprising of Northern African allies who were eager to impress. Their opportunity would surely come. Meanwhile, the Austrian heavy cavalry did just as we expected. They rode straight at our lines, specifically our left flank, where we were arguably at our weakest. One regiment of foot stood in square formation. Our dragoons were immediately dispatched to intercept. As they approached the enemy cavalry, their opening volley completely shattered the enemy's flank unit. but would they be able to hold their ground? The bugles were then heard, and the enemy heavy cavalry rode straight at our desperate squares that were protecting our flank. Our dragoons at this point made the decision to engage some of the enemy cavalry in melee, hoping this would allow some of the others time to reload and reform. Sadly, the dragoons were now surrounded on 3 sides by heavy cavalry. It was not to be their day. As the remaining dragoons ran the length of our line, the damage they had inflicted to the enemy became clear. Their massive cavalry advantage was no more. As our soldiers attempted to take some quick rest, we realised the enemy infantry had crested the hill and were now bearing down upon us. The remnants of the enemy cavalry then charged into our flank, while our infantry began firing lead. They faced an enemy with 3 men for every 1 that they could field. Accuracy would have to be on point. While the infantry fight splintered into 2 separate engagements, one involved our centre and one was atop a small hill on our right flank. This right flank would prove to be the crucial area. It was then decided our artillery would aim to thin out the enemy lines while they were packed together. There was only so long our boys could stand and fight under such violent enemy fire, and eventually the centre had to give way, and it was decided we would reform and make a last stand on the right flank next to the small hill. The conclusion was drawing close. As the smoke started to clear from areas of the battlefield, it was clear the Austrian main assault had been largely repelled. However, the enemy reserve now came towards our last bastion of defence upon the right flank. The Haarlem Hellfighters still standing. Even at this point we were outnumbered 4-1, however the enemy were scattered and would only attack us 1 regiment at a time. With our artillery emplacements falling silent one by one, the remnants of the army knew what lay ahead. One last stand to save Naples. Our final emplacement then started firing canister over the top of our own line, to devastating effect may we add. At this point, the enemy had 5 regiments remaining. We had 2 and an artillery piece. Whoever won this would at best have a Pyrrhic victory on their hands. We formed up around our final artillery piece, prepared canister, and reloaded. The final assault was coming.
You guys can fire rank, right?
The Jaegers are charging us.
All off. Yes. 117 and I'm still here. We need the mortars coming in like now. Please, boys. Come on.
As the confusion and melee started, we realised it was all down to a last-ditch range battle between our Haarlem Hellfighters and the enemy's 13 Regiment of Foot. Would it be unlucky for them? Yes. Yes, it would be. In what was one of the closest battles of the campaign, we would scrape victory together and perhaps push the Austrian Empire into a peace deal. Unfortunately, there was no time to mourn the dead nor celebrate our victory in Italy. The siege of Dublin began almost simultaneously. This would be the final engagement of this campaign, the British Empire making its final stand. They found themselves on a modern star fort, an impressive work of defences that would not be easy to crack. Naturally, we deployed our artillery and immediately began hammering away at the walls. Meanwhile, our legions of gentlemen, our hybrid infantry, kept up a constant volley of fire at the enemy who were atop the defensive battlements. Then a breach was made, which collapsed with enemies still atop the walls. Our legion of hybrid troops not stopping their incessant fire the entire time. It was our line infantry's time to move in and shine. Leading the way were Walensky's Nutmeggers and the Dougie MacArthur brigades. Both had a rich history of battle awards for victories over British forces. We were hoping they would be gaining another. As we kept the enemy occupied in the breach, our other infantry regiments were sent around the eastern side of the fort to probe for weaknesses or an area we could enter. We then realised some of the local peasants who were loyal to the crown had attempted to sally out of a gate on this flank and had caused a pile-up of bodies. Our cavalry desperately rushed towards the open gate in an attempt to force our way inside. As they gained ground, our infantry began entering also. The sun was setting on the British Empire for the first time. It must have been incredibly frustrating for the enemy commanders. As the breach was being held firmly, the local militia and citizens were the ones who had doomed them with the opening of the side gate. We continued to flood our troops in through the gate, as the enemy's control of the main courtyard was faltering. At this point, the Blackpool Brigade entered the main breach, and before we knew it, the line infantry were duking it out at just about point blank range. The brave decision by the Blackpool lads allowed us to enter Dublin Castle and cut down the Union Jack, all while hoisting the Star-Spangled Banner. The British Empire was no more. Oh my god, look at the Blackpool Brigade. This must be the most point blank fire we've ever had from line infantry. Oh boys, reloading. Here we go. They're making ready. I hope they're firing at them. No, not firing. As the last American had given their life to free the world of the tyrannical British Empire, our fatigued and frustrated country decided that a period of reflection was needed where we could rebuild ourselves and look towards our own future closer to home. Destiny had well and truly been manifested. Upon hearing of the fall of the British Empire, the Austrians were not long in accepting peace, fearing that with no other distractions, they would be next. The British former colonies in the northern wastes of Canada eventually surrendered to us and were welcomed into the United States of the Americas, as we would come to be known. This new country would consist of 70 states, ranging from the frozen north to the northern point of the South American landmass, each citizen with the same rights and privileges as the next. Hi, it's me, your boy Kyle. Just wanted to thank everyone for their contributions for this playthrough. We had a total of 76 units redeemed, whether that be a ship or a regiment of infantry, so thank you for that. Probably one of my most successful playthroughs we've had, and the fact that it's been recapped and it's now on YouTube for us to watch, I will cherish it. We will be starting a new playthrough in Rome 2 Total War, using the Defiant Impera mod, which is an overhaul mod that completely changes the way the game works. I owe probably about 400 hours of my gameplay in this game to this mod alone, so I'm looking forward to that. If that is something you're interested in, obviously you know where to find me. We'll be live on Twitch with it during the week, and I'll be putting recaps on YouTube again. And again, just thank you for the feedback on the YouTube videos, on Twitch itself, just as to how these have been. They've been my first attempt at really editing and doing any sort of recaps. I've enjoyed it. If the Rome one does well, it might be something I look to continue on for the future. So there's not much left to say other than thank you. And I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.